Hello, folks. Welcome back to World War II TV and the last show before I take a few days break. Michael Nyberg is with us next Tuesday. We have two shows on Wednesday, including Michael Veach over from the US, from Australia, talking about the Borneo campaign. Lots more stuff coming up. So several two-show a day days coming up in the next few weeks, but I'm off for a few days. Anyway, right now, the Merchant Marine probably gets short shrift when we think about the USA's contribution to the war, but around 250,000 Americans served and over 700 Merchant Marine ships were lost. Andy Zimmerman returns to tell their story. You may remember him from the LST show a few weeks ago. I'll bring him in now. Good afternoon, Andrew. How are you today?
Good afternoon, Paul. I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Well, I'm doing well, and we were just having that discussion about logistics and transport and shipping, and I just said to you I'd listened to a podcast, The History Hit, with Dan Snow and James Holland today, saying it's all about shipping. And when you boil World War II down, it is all about getting stuff from point A to point B. And when we hear what you've got to say about this branch, it will be amazing why we just don't talk about them more. Again, we sometimes talk about the hardware, but not the people. So we'll bring up your slides and hand it over to you. But obviously, you've got a vested interest in this. This is your thing. So explain to those who don't know what your connection is with this.
Absolutely. I don't know if anybody can see in the background there with some of the lights there, but I've got some books and posters, and even I guess if I move my head here a little bit, you can see a metal sign that I built. I am a high school history teacher and business teacher, and so I built that here at school to kind of give some tribute there. But my background goes all the way back, well over 20 years with the Merchant Marine. I actually attended and graduated from the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy, which we will highlight in this presentation. I went out on ships for about a year, and then once I graduated, I also was out on twofold. One was I was in the Merchant Marine part of the Navy Reserve for 11 years, and I was also serving on various vessels on the Great Lakes. So this has always been a passion of mine, and I might have written a book, a very personal account on LSTs, and I love
Link
that.
below,
and
folks. Link below.
Yes, yeah. And I shameless plug, I guess, but this is really my background, and this is something that, again, we talked before this. How has this not been really talked about, whether it's on this channel or just in general? People just are not familiar with the Merchant Marine, or if they know it, it's very little.
Yeah. So
you can kind of see there, I had to switch my picture up from the LSTs, and that was actually on a trip with you.
Yeah.
So it's been a few years. Sadly, my hair situation has not improved from that.
Yeah, it never comes back again. Once it starts going, there's only one way it goes, unless you go over to Turkey and have a transplant. But yeah,
it's terrible. So I apologize for the glare already off of my head there. But as I mentioned, I'm a graduate of the Merchant Marine Academy. I want to mention, because I kind of went over this last time. I didn't say a whole lot, but prior historical contributor to womenoffshore.org. And the reason why I bring that up is because this is a wonderful organization for Merchant Marine women who serve in that industry. And it's sort of an uphill climb for them because historically they've not been in the Merchant Marine, although you're going to see tons of examples all over the internet. And you're going to see some that I mentioned here and some stories that I wrote about, kind of early wave makers, as you'd call it, of merchant mariners, and I'm excited to tell their stories here during this presentation. So just as a kind of a quick review, I'm not going to, you guys can go back and watch everything. I kind of put this up here because, again, what we talked about before in your intro is why talk about it, really? Because everybody seems to be focused on the tip of the spear, as you said last time. But what people don't realize is, again, this shirt of mine, where did it come from? Your hat, where did it come from? Where are your groceries coming from? It's all supply lines. And the Merchant Marine is the ultimate supply line. And to the point where, it is truly another branch of service that, as we'll see later, just does not really get its credit. But without logistics, none of this is possible. And we'll see all of that at the end with some quotes as well. So some of the things that I just kind of wanted to highlight here with the Merchant Marine, very high level. But if you're not familiar, with the history of the Merchant Marine before we get to World War II. Just a couple little matters here. One, during the Revolutionary War and really the War of 1812, they're serving as privateers. And this is really what forms, at least in the United States, our first Navy. It predates the Navy. They're taking what we call letters of marque from governments. And we're basically saying, look, you are now commissioned into your ship, and the crew will now be in the Navy, and which essentially, again, doesn't quite exist at this point, but you will be armed. And we need you essentially attacking those British vessels of not only commerce, but also of war. And so this is what they're doing in our fight for freedom there, and our own anonymity, really. And then we get to raiders and blockades during the Civil War. Again, much more of the same type of activities, but I almost get to have a little more fun with it. Sadly, they're all Americans in this one, but they are going off and they're trying to either have blockades of the southern states, or they're raiding the commerce, both Confederate and those for the North. And this is their main activity. You're going to see this as a common theme, but after a lot of wartime, the Merchant Marine, it ebbs and flows, right? So we're going to see the build up, and then it kind of goes down, and then you're going to see a build up again. And so after the Civil War, a lot of these companies that have been operating as privateers are more or less, they shut down. They're sold off to a lot of British companies, a lot of those European shipping companies. They've just kind of been devastated. And so things really kind of get battered and battered and battered. And there really isn't much of a Merchant Marine until about like the 1870s. And it's still not built up much, but you'll see some schools come online. For example, the State University of New York's Maritime, SUNY Maritime, comes in around 1874, I want to say. And they will be a reoccurring theme even today as training Merchant Marine officers. But again, still not a big force until we get back to World War I, and we get into, again, something you're going to see during World War II, the U-boats versus the Merchant Marine, kind of the first battle of the Atlantic, if you will. And so we start building up that again, and again, there's surplus. So we again, kind of goes down a little bit. And then, what we're going to get to on the next slide is basically this pre-World War II buildup. Yes, SUNY Maritime first and foremost. I agree. You'll see, I'm a King's Pointer, but I give everybody their props. Yes. I can tell where you went to school. Play you guys every year in football, by the way. So I'm going to highlight some Jones Act here, Merchant Marine Act of 1936, just to give you a little bit of a background. So we're post World War I, and this is the Merchant Marine Act of 1920, or the Jones Act, which we still refer to today. It's still very debated. There's a lot of consequences today and back then. If you're in the Merchant Marine, you typically support this. If you're not, you don't really understand what's going on. But basically what this is for national security concerns, it was a federal law that required that goods that were shipped between U.S. ports were not only put onto ships that were built in the United States, owned by the United States, so they're U.S. flag, and basically operated by U.S. citizens. So this has been a really kind of protective measure for those in the Merchant Marine that we still see today. And that's why, whether it's shipyards or those that are going into the Merchant Marine, we have a certain process to this. Yes, it's more expensive, but it has been vital to protecting our Merchant Marine whenever we don't have times of war. The Merchant Marine Act of 1936 is what I'm even more familiar with, because it created the U.S. Maritime Commission for Shipbuilding, which we'll get to yesterday's presentation here in a second. But that is what's going to ramp up all of the Liberty ships and the Victory ships and so on pre-war. It sets a lot of standards for firefighting, for safety measures, because there's a lot of tragedies and there's no real standards out there. So you see some loss of life that shouldn't have really happened. And then this is sort of the fallout from it. It also
it's worth pointing out again, Andy, that there are a lot of people who kind of think that like Britain had no preparations for war until September 1939, and the US, again, Pearl Harbor 41. But the wheels been in motion for some time, certainly at a high level, that there's an inevitability about the fact the world will be at war at some point in the middle of the 20th century. So, there are people advocating for different types of strategic bombing in the future. There are processes begun. So just because the wider population of various countries don't envisage an America going into war doesn't mean that there isn't at least planning going on behind the scenes to make sure things are at least prepared. I mean, you can't do everything until war's, but at least kind of get the ball rolling.
Absolutely. And you and I were talking before this about my trip last few days to Willow Run up in Michigan and the Arsenal of Democracy. This is all started in 1940, and Lend-Lease and so on. You're going back into the 30s, or even back to Churchill talking about, hey, this guy's a threat. We've got some problems here. So absolutely, we're trying to take some measures here, knowing kind of what's inevitable, but also knowing, hey, the public might not be on board with it yet, but whenever they are on board, we're ready to go. Or at least we've taken some of those steps. So, and so what they talk about with this Merchant Marine Act is that they also, and probably the thing that's most famous for, other than maybe some of the safety and the shipbuilding, would be creating some training sites to ensure that we have some quality officers in particular on these ships, which will kind of lead into all of the academies. Some of the propaganda, I just wanted to throw it out there because I've got a bunch behind me. I've got a ton. I'm sure my wife has not been thrilled with it over the years, but all of our hallways upstairs are filled with posters, including the one on the right, which, that is probably you bet I'm going back to see, might be my absolute favorite one because, one, it's an enlistment poster, but two, if you look at that face, to me, I got Robert De Niro written all over it. I mean,
it's a love child of Robert De Niro and Popeye, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's fantastic. So I love some of the propaganda here. It talks about convoys, which we'll get into, talks about shipbuilding, but really we need guys. So, kind of go ahead. So the Battle of the Atlantic, again, I'm not going to, it's been covered on your channel. I just want to highlight a few things. Again, to tie it all together, we're looking at a lot of Liberty ships and then eventually Victory ships versus U-boats, but we're going to also see that it's coastwise mariners on both coasts, but especially the East Coast that will have a part in this as well. Liberty ships made by the thousands, very simple design versus far superior technology with the German U-boats. And really, when we go to the next slide, what we'll see is graphs from what looks like 1985. So I apologize for that. I don't want to put anybody to sleep. But again, hinting on what was discussed yesterday and the history of the Merchant Marine, why do we get into the shipbuilding and the activities that we get into? Because U-boats are in the middle of their happy times. Happy time one, happy time two. And even as late as you're talking 1942, 1943, they're just crushing the Allies. And we're not able, Britain is having problems starving out. We'll see something with Malta. We have to start coming up with better ways to combat this. And so
this is the interesting thing. I mean, I don't want to interrupt again, but it's the German method that will rely on them having this swift victories. They have got to put each country they're trying to dominate out of the war as quickly as possible. And as you say, the U-boats, things like that are technology that on the surface, no pun intended, or under the surface, the Allies don't seem to have an immediate response to in terms of U-boat hunting per se. But what the Allies do is they just crank into to production this. We will dominate a little bit down the line in a few weeks, months, years. We're going to have so much stuff out in the water of all shapes and sizes that your U-boats, no matter how good they are, will just be dominated by bigger and better and volume. But that takes time to implement. That's which is why you, as you said, you have that panic stage. We now know wasn't quite the absolute drama it seemed to be. But there are meetings going on in the Houses of Parliament and across your side of the pond where it's like, crap, we're losing ships at a rate that seems to be going to be
not sustainable.
And unsustainable. Exactly, that's the word I'm looking for. But those graphs there show that you've got to, it's the long game, isn't it? You've got to look at the long game, not the happy time is exactly what it is. It is a blip in the grand trajectory of the war, where the Germans are gaining the upper hand in a kind of they've won the battle but are losing the war.
Absolutely. And, you know, something I always tended to show my students is, which is still one of the, I think, fabulous movies, Das Boot. It just to show the general life of, I show them life in the Merchant Marine and then life on some of the U-boats. And, you know, you see in that movie the frustration as the convoys are coming and this production has really been ramped up. And even you see the master on board there that is just fed up with the German propaganda and the kids that they're sending him, because he realizes that things are starting to decline, right? And so, you know, that's really, again, that's a story of the war, right? We're out producing and ultimately out shipping the Axis powers, which again, you know, that I hate to say it because, you know, there's plenty of people that were kind of thrown quite literally in this case to the wolves, the wolf packs, but it goes back forever with war. The more you throw at them, eventually you will push through, but there's going to be those growing pains. So, so we're basically out producing them. And I think on the next slide, it kind of hints at the presentation from yesterday. And I kind of put a link down there for Doug. I want to give him a big shout out because one, I enjoyed his presentation. I'm certainly going to be buying his book and reading that. And two, because he's highlighting the Merchant Marine, again, something that we don't really talk about. So please, if you haven't checked that out, look into that. And one of the other things that I wanted to hit on from this picture is the picture on the right. We go back to, there's only 2 Liberty ships really left, to my knowledge, that are shown off in the United States, the Jeremiah O'Brien out in San Francisco and the John W. Brown in Baltimore. And I had the chance to ride on the John W. Brown many years ago. Again, something my wife, I'm sure, was thrilled about. But she's catching on. And I don't know if I ever told you, but, you know, all of her times in Normandy with you, she said that was the highlight of the entire trip. So little by little, we're getting her.
Well, that's nice. It's not the first time that's happened where people have, you know, been won over by a good tour guide in Normandy or elsewhere. And I'm not just including myself there. It's you make it about the people. Everybody finds it interesting ultimately. Yeah,
absolutely. So the experience was wonderful, and I would encourage you to get on and kind of check this out. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the crews as we go on here. Some strategies that I just kind of want to highlight. There's tons of books on this, so I keep it somewhat survey level here. But you know, we talk about the Merchant Marine during World War II, and we're talking about blackouts all along the East Coast, which we weren't doing initially, as we are selling goods, lend-lease, and everything else to Great Britain. But this is a huge effort during the war to, hey, you don't have any curtains, we'll give you curtains. You know, here's our time when, you know, it's 8:30, lights out, because we're losing. So, I mean, you talk about the happy times off the East Coast. It's all when, you know, they're just, it's like fish in a barrel. And so they're able to take care of most of that when we put in the blackouts, although there's some kind of funny unintended consequences with those as well. People going out during the blackouts and falling through, you know, what I want to say, pothole, like covers, manhole covers in New York City and so on. But this is really a huge policy during the time. So first strategy, let's take care of the lights. Second strategy, and probably the most famous, is the convoys. We have to go back to the convoy system to take care of the wolf packs. And, you know, we'll talk about a very famous convoy down the line. But, you know, as many of your listeners know, keep the most important assets in the middle and keep a lot of your defenders on the outside. And it's hard to tell on the left there, but I wanted you to see some of the routes from 1943 to 45. And I want to highlight the ones that, in particular, I guess, 2 little things. One, you know, we now have the Panama Canal in particular that we're using very, very heavily for strategy there. So we're not having to go entirely around South America. But in reality there, the one that I really want to stick out to you and show you is probably the northernmost, which is the Murmansk run,
Yeah.
Which was pure hell. North Atlantic, the weather was awful. And if you were lucky enough to get through all of that on a slow-paced merchant marine vessel, then you still have to contend with all the U-boats that are over there on your way. That, I mean, if you drew that stick, you might not be coming home. Of course, a lot of these guys aren't really coming home, which we'll see down the line as well. But these are some of the strategies. These are some of the routes that we can touch on. And again, there's many more books to go into a lot of the detail.
And I think to emphasize the fact that everything here is international, you know, convoys across the globe were not just made up of American or British, but you have all these other civilian vessels and military vessels around the world, and the empire coming together. And when you read about some of the convoys and the number of different languages they had to submit information to commanders, it's crazy, like 12 different languages, because you know, people from South America and Scandinavia and all that as well. So it's a good story that, you know, the seafaring nations, in a sense, sort of came together on this. And yeah, and when we were talking about Norway recently, we were talking about the Danish and Norwegian sailors, what they brought to the Royal Navy from their understanding of the waters off where they were from, and how that conveys and converts to sort of using landing craft and things like that. There's a real database of knowledge that is being tapped into, the people who knew the different parts of the world, because, you know, going to sea is still in the 21st century one of the most perilous thing human beings can do, isn't it?
Absolutely. And today, to your point, with everything being so international, I think back to even during COVID times, with things are trying to come into the West Coast, and there's just a huge log jam during COVID and everything of are you able to get things, supply and demand? And that's when people finally started to think about, where is my stuff coming from? Yeah. And maybe a little bit of who is transporting that. And, you know, during my time out at sea, I always think about the international language, you know, with English and all of talking to other ships. A buddy of mine is actually a ship pilot in the Delaware Bay and brings a lot of international ships in and out of Philadelphia. And so what he sees on a daily basis just blows my mind. Right. And I was fortunate enough a couple of months ago to kind of live a lifelong dream. I got to take a small vessel through the Panama Canal and just slightly feel what it might have been like back in the day to go through there on some of the destroyers, some of the merchant marine ships, some of the carriers, and so on. So that was really incredible, and what goes into that, and the amount of countries that they deal with here. So again, yes, we need to be thinking about everybody around the world. And I know this is very American merchant marine in World War II centric, but as we said beforehand, you need to think about everybody and their part in all of this.
Well, hopefully you'll prompt people from the other nations to put something together. I met a Brazilian YouTuber a few weeks ago who contacted me today, and he's putting together a show about Brazil in World War II. And he said, which aspect do you want me to talk about? I said, well, all of them, please, you know, because it's important to understand. So, yeah, let's keep on moving. The men.
You will see a little bit of a focus on officers, but let's be honest here. Without those that are merchant seamen, we don't have anything. And that's the same, as I mentioned, with LSTs. Same thing is true with every branch of service. Without those that are more on the enlisted side, you don't have anything. And so, you know, I want to mention Sheepshead Bay, which really was the main, not that there weren't others, because there were, but that was the main place that could crank out about 30,000 merchant seamen per year. And you can see some of the pictures there. And they're really the lifeblood of the service, because when you're on a ship, yes, you have your engineers, you have your masters, chief engineers, and so on. But without your ordinary seamen, without your able-bodied seamen, your wipers, your firemen, you know, armed guard, and so on, you're not going to be able to do a whole lot. So same thing is true today. You don't have complements of 40 to 60 men like you had back then. Today, a lot of the ships I was on, we're typically operating around 20. But without those guys, you know, I think it's just very important to highlight their contributions to the war, because, again, that is the vast majority of who we're talking about here.
Well, we've got that slide up there about the men themselves. Gary asked a question earlier how was the perception of draft dodgers aimed at merchant marines overcome? Because it goes back to what we were saying at the beginning about people's understanding of how you contribute to the war effort. And I think people think you've got to be in a uniform. I mean, I know there are uniforms in the merchant marine, but you've got to be holding a rifle and running across a field and bayoneting a German in a machine gun nest to be contributing to the war effort. So when they need all these extra personnel, what was the public perception of joining the merchant marine considered differently to joining the more obvious military services?
It was. I mean, let's be honest. There was a stigma there, and I can't say. I don't want to call it draft dodgers per se, but in this, well, first of all, some guys wanted to serve in other branches, but maybe they weren't qualified to serve in those for whatever reason. And you know who took them? The merchant marine. And so, that's one aspect of this, that they tried, but they couldn't. And then they tried to find another way to serve. Others, that's just the only place they ever wanted to serve. And then, yeah, of course, you had others that, said, hey, I would like to serve in this as opposed to being on the front lines per se. And yes, there was a stigma attached to that. But what I think you'll see in this, and especially on the last slide, which we'll obviously get to down the line, is there is no shame, and not even no shame, but there is so much pride to be had from service in the merchant marine that, again, we're still trying to tell their story, because as we'll see, and I saw a comment pop up earlier, when you see the numbers, you're going to see that this is as dangerous and honestly even more dangerous than any other service that's out there. So I hope that this just serves as another testament to they're just as brave as everybody else, if not, I can't say anybody is any more brave than anybody else, but they're just as brave as everybody else.
Peter Falk, Columbo from the TV's Columbo, came up earlier as being exactly the kind of person you're talking to. Given that he was missing an eye from a childhood illness, he couldn't join the Marines or the Army, so he joined the Merchant Marine and served his country that way through however many years it was in World War II. So that's your typical person,
absolutely
young and fit, but just missing 50% of his vision, so he had to take a different approach. But that's exactly the kind of people, not that I'm saying that everybody in the Merchant Marine was missing an eye, but it's that person that wants to serve, but there's a reason they can't serve in one capacity, so they serve somewhere else.
Well, and they talk all the time about being 4F, and you see on the movies about, well, so and so was unfit, and so they committed suicide or something tragic like that because they couldn't serve. Well, again, maybe you're unfit in one way, but you can still be useful and you still want to serve. I'd give you even more credit in that sense, because you might have an out, even as late as you go on to Korea, Vietnam, and so on. You might have an out with the draft, but if you're still willing to serve, I mean, I give all the credit in the world to you.
Absolutely, definitely. Moving on.
All right, so to my SUNY buddy there, bear with me here for a second. Let's do this. Before I talk about the Merchant Marine Academy, I want to give them their credence. So SUNY Maritime, Mass Maritime, California Maritime, Great Lakes Maritime, Texas at Galveston, you have their maritime school. So we have a lot of amazing merchant marine officers that are out there from all of these schools. Maine Maritime, I want to make sure I don't forget Maine Maritime as well. I know somebody's going to come after me if I forget one. So all of these schools have been developing excellent maritime officers for many, many years. And the only reason why I seem to be highlighting this, one, I do have a background here. Two, we have the Merchant Marine Act of 1936. And then there's just some other stories from that I'm familiar with that I throw in here. Again, I would challenge somebody to bring in those other academies and have another episode on that, because sorry, I'm just reading some of the comments there. Yes, you could join at Merchant Marine at 16, even younger. I found those that were even younger than that. And you'll see a family that certainly goes to that. But again, this is kind of my background. So you'll see me talk about the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy. So authorized 1938, finalized in 1943. They're cranking out Merchant Marine officers at all the academies, at all the sites, past Christian, down south and other places. They call them 90-day wonders, which is was not really meant to be a compliment. However, I think their service, with some mistakes, bore out very, very well and courageously. It is the only academy of all 5 services. So you're talking about West Point Military Academy, you're talking about Naval Academy, Air Force Academy, Coast Guard Academy, and the Merchant Marine Academy, within that group at least. And they're the only ones to carry a battle standard, which is a separate flag where their guys were going out during wartime, serving on these vessels to get experience. And you'll see that something that's very famous around our academy are the 142 midshipmen that died during the war, and as well as 68 graduates. And the 142 is sacrilegious, more or less, at our school. It's on everything that we have, from the shirt I'm wearing to all of our crests to and so on. And the 142, I would love to do a separate thing just on those guys. But I want you to draw your attention. First of all, you can see the academy there. You can see what is on a war memorial on the lower right. It's a small picture, but hopefully you can kind of zoom in and see that. But what I want to really highlight is the picture on the left that kind of almost looks like there's lights on it, but that's how bright it really is and how dark and dirty everything is around that. So the Merchant Marine Academy graduates officers that go on and serve either active duty or in the reserves of all the branches, but they also crank out licensed by the Coast Guard or Merchant Marine officers, both deck and engine. And so these guys were going out during the war, and they wanted to find a way to honor them. And this wall is just that. So all of these names were basically put onto there. And I did not see this until the 75th anniversary in 2018. This wall, even though it is it's in a spot that's prominent on campus where we would eat 3 times a day. And the reason why I had not seen this, although I had heard the rumor, is because it was covered up. They had a large ship picture that was in front of it for more or less, a better part of 75 years, because it was too hard for guys to look at. They knew that there were their shipmates, guys that were in their classes and so on, that didn't come back, and they just couldn't take it anymore. So they put a picture up in front of it. And then for the 75th anniversary, they had the American Merchant Marine Museum, which is also up on Long Island at the Merchant Marine Academy. And they were able to take it down, put the picture up somewhere else prominently, which was great. And then they had an unveiling that I got to be there for, and it just blew my mind. And so these guys now, again, finally have a voice and a testament to their service. So again, a little bias, I agree there, but these guys served, and in some cases you'll see their stories will just blow you away.
Okay, thank you. Brilliant stuff.
Yeah. So one where you did have a King's Pointer, and you had a SUNY Maritime guy, and it's a fabulous book. It's called At All Costs, by Sam Moses. I don't know if you had a chance to pick that up or if you've had any of but Operation Pedestal is something that I love teaching my students about. So dire situations, right? We're talking early 1940s, and we're talking Malta. And Malta is fighting like hell to try to keep those convoys, German, Italian convoys, from getting in and out of Libya. You know, we're fighting in North Africa. They're trying to keep them out of the Middle East for a lot of the oil that's over there. Because again, you keep the German war machine going with all of that oil and forget about it. So, but the problem that occurs is that Malta is running out of oil themselves, and they can't get a lot of their planes up in the air to fight back against the Germans and the Italians. So, you know, convoy after convoy is going through the Strait of Gibraltar. And again, it's like shooting fish in a barrel. It's really not that wide. And as convoys are going through there, they're getting decimated either on shore or by airplanes. And so with one last real push here, in conjunction between the United States and Great Britain, they find the largest tanker in the United States, which happens to be the SS Ohio. And you can see some pictures of it up there. And they throw a lot of defenders around. I just call them defenders, but a lot of ships around them in the convoy to protect them on the way through. And I mean, if this doesn't work, we've got major problems with Malta, Libya, Middle East, and so on. And ultimately, they will push through. But as you can see there, I agree there, Norma. Fantastic story. Everybody should know this story. And they basically limp the ship into port. You can see it there, the two ships, one on either side. And I want to say that one of them either was a deck officer or they were, I don't think they were master. I want to say they might have been like a third mate or something from SUNY Maritime, and a cadet from the Merchant Marine Academy is on one of those ships. And they're literally dragging this ship into port amid all this fire from aircraft. And they will get it in there. They will kind of refuel the planes, get them up and going again, and ultimately fight back and not let them get to some of their objectives.
I just want to mention we did do a show back in 2001 with Minda Bailey, who was trying to get a movie made based on the book at all costs.
Oh
man! It's obviously not happened yet. But she was related to Merchant Mariner Fred Larson, who was on Pedestal on the Ohio. And she was kind of putting a plea out there for millionaires to come and give the backing, but it hasn't happened. But it's absolutely deserving of it. And when I was in Malta with Mag a few years ago, the museum, I forget which museum they tell the Pedestal story in, but there's like a interactive table thing and videos playing. And I knew the story in advance, and I knew the Ohio got through eventually, but you're living it in like real time, and you find yourself going, I hope it makes it. I hope it makes it. Even though you know it does, you've got caught up in the moment, and they tell the story so very well there. You forget what the outcome is, and when you then the little video thing or the table kind of makes a of the ships, and everyone goes hooray, and it's like you're back there. It's incredibly well done. I'll try and find out which museum that is, but it's an amazing story. And as you said, the Pedestal convoy has been tackled by some pretty amazing historians, including one I don't particularly like, but it is an amazing story. But yeah, back to you.
Well, to your point, two things. One, I hope the movie does get made someday, because that would be fabulous. I mean, I think I would put that on par with any other frontline story that's out there. And two, I'm already scheduled to go to Malta next year as part of a family vacation. So when you find that out, let me know, and I'll be there.
Oh, and I can guarantee all your family will love Malta. It is just the most. I think Valletta is maybe my favorite capital city in the world. I like Sarajevo as well. But just you've got everything from crusades to your biblical stories, if that's what floats your boat. You've got your World War II stuff. You've got amazing food, amazing views, amazing architecture. It's just Malta is fantastic. Just the traffic gets a bit crazy around Valletta, but yeah, anyone in the sidebar who's been will echo my sentiment. It's an amazing place. The family will love it.
Well, good, because it took a few conversations to convince them to even, because they're just not familiar with it. So and I just had another teacher friend that just got back from there and said you have to go. 100% recommend, have to go back there. So thanks. I'll definitely hit up the museum and go there. But this is again, if you're not familiar, please check out this book and this story.
Brilliant.
All right, now we get into a few individual stories that unless you are really a diehard Merchant Marine person, you might not be familiar with. And a couple of these, again, I've written stories on for other publications, but mostly for womenoffshore.org. This is Clara Gordon Main, and she's in her mid-50s at this point during the war, and she is a stewardess crew member on the SS Benjamin Harris. And again, it's a merchant ship at the start of World War II, and they're actually charged with rescuing the 4th Marines over, you're talking about China, you're talking about the Philippines over there, and Japan more or less gets word of it, and they ultimately take over the Benjamin Harris, and she will be, we're pretty sure through all the records, that she is the first female POW of World War II. And actually, we think that their entire crew is more or less like the first set of POWs, because it occurs the next day. They heard about Pearl Harbor, and then this occurs, December 8th. She had the forethought to grab supplies as they were under attack, just in case. Hey, we're trying to. Well, let's back up. I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm getting excited. The captain says, "There's no way I'm going to surrender this ship to the Japanese. So he actually steers to run her aground, successfully runs her aground, but of course she's damaged. And as they're trying to abandon ship, more or less, they are trying to grab what supplies they can. She grabs first aid kits and whatever she can, and she will actually save the life of her chief steward, and she will get recognized with the Merchant Marine Meritorious Service Medal for this. Again, in her mid-50s, and just this thought of something needs to be done. What are we going to do to take care of everybody around there? And everybody should know the story of her sacrifices, because she was in a POW camp for, I want to say she was there for 2 years, and the rest of the crew was like another year or two after that. So, I mean, they were in there a very long time, kind of like those with the Bataan Death March. Yeah. And so please look her story up, Clara Gordon, Maine. The next individual that I'd like to kind of highlight here is Sadie O'Horton. And I know they've been working on a book for this. I spoke with Sadie's son, and this is, man, I mean, if this book doesn't get published, I'll be upset. So this is where we talked about the coastwise mariners. Everybody highlights, and I have two up to this point, the ships. But what about the tug and barges all along the East Coast that are getting decimated by the German U-boats? Nobody, I mean, I stumbled across this many years ago, and it blew my mind that I knew nothing about it. And so Sadie O'Horton is motivated because her son was serving on the tug Menominee during the war and was sunk and killed. And she said, I have to do something. So she took her entire family and they manned a barge along the eastern coast. Now, I'm not saying, that they're living on the tug like a lot of other guys are. They're literally living on the barge. And for those that know anything about barges, there's practically no power. You might have a little gas or coal stove that you're living by, that you're cooking by, but it is rough. It is very raw living. And you can see that she tried to sign up for the Merchant Marine. They did not have women that were truly allowed to serve in that capacity at that time. I know we talked about Clara, but I'm referring more to overall Merchant Marine, like armed guard and so on. So, but she was able to get her card, her papers, and you can see down in the lower right there. And you can see a little one sitting on her lap in the other picture on her barge. And if you look in the background, you can sort of see a little bit of a house there, a pilot house. That was where they lived. And again, it was very crude. But she would perform duties such as cooking, running the boiler, manning the wheelhouse, anything that was required of her, going ashore to get supplies when they were in port, anything. And she had a treacherous duty all along the eastern coast, taking things from one shipyard to another, from one port to another. And her entire family served in the Merchant Marine, the kids and everybody, and they've all been honored. It took a long, long time, but she was finally recognized after her death, many years after her death in 2017, and was the first female to get veteran status by the United States. It's incredible. And the son, Don, who I spoke with, is also a veteran of the Merchant Marine, and he's my kid's age. He's in elementary school at this time, and he's serving. So the coastwise mariners just were not granted anything. And other than the O'Hortons, basically you don't know anything about it. So here's to hoping Don can get his family's story told.
It reminds me of the show we did a couple of years ago about all the convoys going up the coasts of the UK, bringing down oil and coal and things like that, that somehow didn't capture the imagination because it was sort of the home front. Absolutely. Even though it's U-boat channels, even though it's dangerous, even though there's Luftwaffe and that, but it somehow it doesn't register with people in the same way that if your loved one is in El Alamein or in Singapore or on a ship the other side of the world, that somehow seems real. But just the perception of trundling up and down the coast doesn't have that danger factor, even though it clearly was dangerous. It doesn't feel dangerous. So I think that's why.
Well, and especially if you're inland, let's say you're in Ohio, I don't even want to say Ohio because we still have the Great Lakes and things are dangerous up there and we have to have armed guard. And there's tons and tons of activities going on throughout the war on the Great Lakes, on the Mississippi River, along the coast. So maybe if you're in a state that you're just out of sight, out of mind,
Yeah.
As you mentioned. But if you're on the coast, maybe you do notice it a little bit because you're seeing the blackouts, you're seeing some of the ships sunk. And, when you really look at how many ships were sunk off the East Coast and how many tugs and barges, I mean, it's just a giant cemetery. And I hope that her story will at least bring light to some, and maybe a little more research on the subject.
Yeah, definitely. Brilliant stuff. Let's keep going.
All right. Edwin J. O'Hara, again, that's near and dear to my heart, Merchant Marine Academy graduate. He is, well, I shouldn't say graduate. He's a cadet midshipman at the time. And that's a picture of him down below. But the more famous picture is on the right. And anybody that comes to the Merchant Marine Academy at Kings Point or talks about Merchant Marine, his name seems to come up a lot. He's in his late teens. He is going out for what we want to call his sea year. So, if you are anybody that's in the Merchant Marine, you have to go out. These are officers. You have to go out on your training. And back then it truly was an entire year. Now you might go out, if you're at some of the state schools, you might go out during the summer. You might go out various times throughout the year, depending on what schedule they set up. And it varies all the time. I would go out through the year on weekends, and then we would go out for 4 months at a time and then 8 months at a time. Back then it was a full year. So he is out there. He will have, I'm trying to think of what malady he had, which caused him to get off his first ship. And then, he will get on later once he's healed up. He will get out on the SS Stephen Hopkins, and they will come under attack by what looks like a German merchant ship, but it's actually sort of in disguise as a surface. It's a surface raider, and it's the Steer. And there's one other vessel, and I can't think of the name right now. But they will come under attack, and you can see all of the bodies laying around the 4-inch gun there, which he was not trained on. But that is him there because after taking a lot of hits, they are on fire. They're really struggling. And one hit in particular will knock out most of the armed guard, those that are trained on that gun. And he really has no other option but to man the gun. And lifting up the 91 pounders, putting it in there, he will start launching shots at the Steer and really will be the first person, the only merchant mariner to sink a German surface raider. And because of that, he gets brought up every time they talk about the Merchant Marine, whether it's a graduation, whether it's something on Maritime Day, they bring up Edwin J. O'Hara, and he's honored at the Merchant Marine Academy with the gymnasium is named after him. And again, many, many other stories as well.
Brilliant.
I want to bring up Herman Rosen, Hank Rosen, briefly here. I read his book called Gallant Ship, Brave Men, got to email back and forth with him, got to meet him while I was at the Academy, graduate of the Merchant Marine Academy as well. And his ship was torpedoed off the coast of Africa. And I think he was one of 24 in an open lifeboat, which, God, you want to talk about life in the Merchant Marine? You were torpedoed many, many times. And if you were lucky to survive that, then you were a part of that club. And the lifeboats for many decades were atrocious. These open lifeboats, you're in the sun constantly. Your lips are chapped and bleeding. In many cases, you're starving, you're thirsty. And if you read this book, which it's a very unknown book, but I came across it at our academy, and it blew me away what this guy had to live through. He survived in a lifeboat for 30 days before he was ultimately rescued. And after a couple of days, they thought, oh, we got a message, we're going to be saved. No. And it just kept getting worse and worse. And what you read is, there are guys that are turning to, that they're getting delirious from drinking salt water. Some of the guys are having mirages out there, and they're seeing, oh, there's my wife, and then they'll drop overboard and never to be seen again. One guy goes mad, and they end up having to kill him with a hatchet. And because they're all thirsty, they're having to split open the body and partake. And that's not something you ever want to have to talk about again. But desperate times call for desperate measures. That's what this poor guy had to go through. And he was only one of 2 or 3 to survive from his boat afterwards, but lived well into his 90s. That to me is an amazing testament to a lot of stories from war. How do these guys survive pure hell in the camps and situations like this, and then live to be in their 90s? So this is another great book that I want to call attention to.
Brilliant stuff.
I could go on with endless stories, sort of like with the LSTs, but one of the biggest takeaways that I want people to understand about the Merchant Marine is this slide. Their contributions, even today, are not being honored like they should be. The sheer lack of respect and recognition is appalling to me, both as a merchant mariner and also a veteran, as an American, and so on, because as you mentioned, there were over 250,000 men and women that served during World War II. And the numbers vary when you go around, but I'm going to stick with the over 9,500 casualties during the war. And if you run the numbers, that is, I know they've talked about the U.S. Marine Corps, but because of Peleliu and Okinawa and so on, some just awful operations, but this is the highest casualty rate during the war. Do you think that that's going to get everyone's attention? I hope it does now, but do you think it's been recognized over the last 80 years? No. Again, I think that goes back to were they less than everyone else? Were they draft dodgers? That's the part that I think really bothers me, is that they did as much as anybody else, and it took until 1988 to get any sort of veteran status, right? And so and do you know what they got in 1988, Paul? They were allowed to be buried as a veteran. That was it. They weren't granted the medical benefits. They weren't granted survivor benefits, and so many other benefits that typical veterans have. And that took 4 decades just to get that. And then as many of them are dying off, you get finally, it took forever just to get this, and most of them are gone. They're honored with the Congressional Gold Medal in 2022. And you can see some of the veterans there, some of the gold, some of the coins that are there. I have actually a copy of one behind me here. It's a tragedy, and we'll see on some of the other slides here what else was a tragedy as far as remembering them. We do have Maritime Day that has been going on since, I believe, 1933, and it's in May every year. But again, who knows about that? The government mentions it once, and then everybody moves on. So please spread the word about all of their contributions in the Merchant Marine, whether you have relatives, whether you're in the Merchant Marine, whether you're on here just because you love World War II. Tell everybody that you can about their sacrifices.
You bring up something that Mag and I were talking about the other day, because Mag works as a tour guide, I'm doing this, is that we don't necessarily attend many ceremonies throughout the year. There was one in a particular town that we thought we could have gone to that. We were doing something else. But we feel that we're doing our bit kind of all year round. We're always talking about things. And there are a lot of people in the UK, the US, around the world who kind of proudly claim that they care about veterans and they care about this. And a lot of them do, but there's also a lot more work they could do to make sure that certain branches, certain genders, certain groups of people are more remembered, because it's easy to talk the talk. It's harder to walk the walk, isn't it? I think we all are a bit guilty of saying that we do our bit, but do we really? Do we really do enough to keep reminding people and letting people know? So it's a good reminder to us all that there are still various peoples from not just World War II, but other wars that have not received the recognition they deserve. Oh,
absolutely. Yeah. My wife's reminding us. Yes. And my wife's grandfather served in Korea. It's one of those that sadly, it seems like it's forgotten, at times, World War I and so on. There's so many that are forgotten about. So please spread the word if you can.
Yeah. James is asking, why do you think it wasn't until 2022, or rather another way of asking what finally caved in 2022?
I'm only going to surmise they were tired of listening to people bothering them, because, as you'll see, even with the National World War II Museum in New Orleans, we're talking about the last 7 to 10 years when they're even getting recognition down there. And they know that they're dying off. And usually what happens is there's one congressman that just keeps pushing and pushing and pushing, because they either have a background, or maybe one of the academies is in their neck of the woods. And so people urge them over and over again. And we just finally get it pushed through. But again, remember, it's not like you have full status of medical benefits and so on. So it's a fairly easy thing to grant them.
Yeah, it reminds me of the scene in Shawshank Redemption when the first lot of books comes through that Andy Dufresne got by just badgering people with letters for years. And they said, yeah, we hope this, or in the film it says, we trust this will meet your demands. So he just carries on writing again, but it's that sense of, if you badger enough, people will do something just to stop you badgering them, rather than necessarily because it's the right thing to do.
I agree. Although I guess sadly, Dick Winters didn't get, they badgered and badgered and badgered for him to get Medal of Honor status. And I guess they waited that out a little, long or whatever. Mm-hmm. And so, I'm glad to see that at least in this case, something was done.
Yeah. And you mentioned the gallery in New Orleans.
And I want to mention, I put a link down there because I wanted to bring up Ralph Crump, who, Merchant Marine veteran, lived in New Orleans, and this is his legacy, one of his legacies. He finally, again, in the last 10 years, they finally put in a Merchant Marine gallery. It's not much. It's almost in a passageway, if you will, between the buildings, but it's something. And I will take anything that I can get. And I could not wait to go down there years ago to look at this. And again, you can see it's more or less a hallway, but it highlights the sacrifices and the motto, really, which I had up before: in peace and war. The Merchant Marine doesn't just go away when we don't have a war. It is still actively serving, just in a different capacity, bringing you all of the goods that you need. Yeah. And so if you are down there visiting the museum, which if you have not been, or if you have been, go back again, because it's a wonderful institution. Check out the artifacts, check out some of the movies, check out the men and women, and see in a small way what hell they had to go through, again, from the Revolutionary War all the way through. But at least this is part of it with World War II.
And thanks for reminding us again that it continues after the war is over, because certain jobs, I guess, frontline Marine, running around with M1 Garands, that does end when the bullets stop flying and the war, there may be occupation duty, things like that. But the sinews of war become the sinews of peace. The need for provisions, the need for food continues. And we talked about the lumberjills on Monday. Mm-hmm. And the wood that went down the mines. Well, the Bevan boys were still being conscripted up until 1948 in the UK, because the war is over, but then the coal is now needed for rebuilding. The coal is now needed to get Britain back on its feet. So now there's this need to transport stuff to help the places that have been liberated, and the Philippines needs reconstructing, and so on and so forth. So V and VJ Day, they have these sort of, that's it, it's all over. But actually, some work and logistics just keeps on going. It arguably becomes even more important.
Yeah, it never ends. I mean, we all need stuff every day, all the time. And a few years ago, they honored, during COVID and so on, they kept talking about the truck drivers, and rightly so. Yeah. But let's not forget how they got most of the stuff to the trucks. Yeah, brilliant stuff. Well, the next one, I've been looking at the slide. Famous, I know all five. The number one I had to think about for a while, but we mentioned Peter Falk earlier on. So you didn't put the caption so that I could guess and show off my knowledge, isn't it? So that's Woody Guthrie, Andy Williams, Carol O'Connor, James Garner, and Cliff Robertson. So folks sing Archie Bunker and Kelly's Heroes and stuff. James Garner, legend, Maverick, Great Escape, and Cliff Robertson from 633 Squadron and Devil's Brigade, and later in the Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogy, with great power comes great responsibility, which somehow sums up the Merchant Marine to me, weirdly. I'm so glad you went through all those. I There are so many more that I could put, and I thought this is a great crop that I think would relate to a lot of people. The new Bob Dylan movie that's out, it kind of is re-highlighting Woody Guthrie's contributions to music and society and history. But Merchant Mariner, Andy Williams, which I might only be 42, but I'm an old soul, if you will, and he's my absolute favorite. Archie Bunker, James Garner. I mean, again, on and on and on. With famous people that you may or may not have known were merchant mariners one way or the other.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Important slide that. And more praise. Yeah.
And I wanted to end with this, and some of them are long. I'll read, a little here or there, but there's just pages and pages of this. And again, this is what we need to spread to everyone else. President Roosevelt had about 50 quotes just on this one page, and this is the one that I pulled out. It just said, "The war is now 5 months old, and we now have our answer. 2 million men have been called to the colors. In far places and near, our soldiers, our sailors, our air pilots, the beleaguered men of the merchant marine have shown the stuff of heroes. Everything we have asked of them, they have delivered. Everything and more." Harry S. Truman talks about the men of the merchant marine doing their job with boldness and daring, talking about all those that were killed and carrying out the bold and daring plan of FDR for a merchant marine of the best designed and equipped passenger and cargo ships manned by the best trained men in the world. Somebody who would know absolutely about the importance of the merchant marine is Dwight Eisenhower. Every man in this Allied command is quick to express his admiration for the loyalty, courage, and fortitude of the officers and men of the merchant marine. We count upon their efficiency and their utter devotion to duty as we do our own. They have never failed us yet, and in all the struggles yet to come, we know that they will never be deterred by any danger, hardship, or privation. When final victory is ours, there is no organization that will share its credit more deservedly than the merchant marine. Boy, I wish I could plaster that everywhere, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah,
Yep.
Yeah.
And then look at Bob Hope, talking about the Z-Men. I love studying Bob Hope and his impact on the war and entertainment and all of that. And he brings this to light as well. The Z-Men are the men of the merchant marine. Listen, it takes nerve to go work in a hot engine room, never knowing when a torpedo might smash the hull above you and send thousands of tons of seawater in to snuff out your life. It takes courage to sail into the waters of an enemy barbaric enough to tie your hands and feet and submerge you so you can drown like a rat without a fight. And so on and so forth, right? I mean, we see this praise. Again, going back to when he asked about the public might not know about it. They might not see it now or then. But the men that were there, the people that it impacted, they knew. Just like the LSTs, they knew.
And it came up in the
ultimate legacy.
Again, during the war, there was the famous British film San Demetrio, London, and there was action in the North Atlantic with Humphrey Bogart. Yep. So during the war, the knowledge was there that the merchant mariners were doing their stuff from all nations. But I guess after war, it just didn't. The movies went to the Marines and the infantry and the tankers and the fighter pilots, and I guess it just kind of got lost a little bit. But you've done an incredible job righting that wrong today. But we have got a stack of questions for you, which is good. So we'll start with the connections. So Charles very early on said his cousin Albert, merchant marine in 1942, the MV Wilcox left the port of New York on February the 25th to deliver cargo to Indian Ocean ports. The ship did not return until December the 9th, 1942. So several months away there. So I love it when there's someone watching with a direct connection. And not that I'm saying that isn't a fantastic contribution, but trumping that slightly was from Tim, who's a former tour customer. I learned last year his father's ship, already slowed by a torpedo hit, was within a day's sail of the steer when it was sunk. So thank you, Mr. O'Hara. So his dad might have been on a ship that was hit, had not O'Hara there. So that's going back that epic story of manning the deck gun there. So that's the extraordinary thing about the internet is that people can be there with all these connections. It just kind of gets goosebumps thinking about it. So that's the comment.
Thank you both for sharing.
Let's go through the questions. So Gary August asked very early on, how important was FDR's implementation of the War Shipping Administration in 42, and how did it affect the merchant marine?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you're talking here again about the shipbuilding, about the standards, about the training and so on, as we kind of mentioned before. FDR, well, first of all, he had a big background and loved ships and so on, and obviously his Navy background. But there's endless stories of him visiting and talking about the Merchant Marine, right? And so there, without all of his, again, the Warshipping Administration, Maritime Commission, and so on, we don't have, what am I trying to say? All the joint efforts up, and the sheer numbers, and more importantly, the money to do what they were able to do during the war. So while I'm not speaking like specifically to the War Shipping Administration, I know, and that was a big part of his question there, I want to just highlight how huge FDR's support was. When you don't see, I mean, you don't hear about Woodrow Wilson as much, or Lincoln and some of these other people talking during wartime about Merchant Marine, but FDR did.
And I think it's also relevant to mention that both FDR and Churchill, not only did they just love shipping from their various pasts, so they also had a good sense of the geopolitical situation and the size of the world. I mean, wasn't it FDR who collected stamps? Churchill traveled the world. So it ended up being fortunate for the world that you had two people in charge of those nations who understood the distances, because a lot of people, if you're living in, the city of Birmingham in the UK or in the Midwest, you unless you've traveled the world, you have no concept of just the distances. And both of those gentlemen did understand that, shipping stuff over that distance is going to be vital. So we were blessed. Those two guys there loved the Navy, loved the fact that we're seafaring countries and we're there to implement the right things. So and
I appreciate him bringing that question up, because that's just going to make me go down another rabbit hole and learn even more about the War Shipping Administration.
Yeah. Thank you. So more questions. So one from Dennis there. Conscientious objectors, did they go into the Merchant Marine?
I'll be honest with you. I don't know the answer to that. I as a teacher, I try very hard not to BS something that I don't have full knowledge on. So I'm going to write that one down. I'm sorry I don't have an answer to that. But I mean, we talked a lot about those that might not have been qualified otherwise. That's a great study, because I mean, I know a lot of the physical stuff, but I don't necessarily know about conscientious objectors. So thank you for bringing that up. I'm sorry I don't have an answer for that.
No, we'll find out.
Yeah, I'm going to go look on that.
Andreas asked, were all Merchant Marine ships armed?
Yes. And I say all, I mean, most, yes. I mean, they had to. And even, now I'm going to go back to World War II, but you had to then. Now it's when you're in war, you're allowed to have that. When you're not in war, you can't really. Thank you. There we go. Operations, shipbuilding, and there we go. Perfect. Thank you. But when you're not in war and you're in peacetime, you can't have an armed, or you shouldn't have an armed merchant ship. That's why we have, right? I mean, and so that's kind of the concept there, is that we just have open shipping everywhere without any restrictions. Even when I went through the Middle East and we were delivering cargo during Iraq and Afghanistan, we had one pistol on board that had to basically be locked up as much as possible. And then we just had fire hoses, because that's not the idea of open international shipping everywhere. And so, but now that we're at war, yes, we have the Bofors guns. We have, you've got the 20s and the 4s and so on that are out there that are armed during war, even though they needed more than what they had, but they were manned. Yes.
Well, that was what I was going to say. Sometimes it felt like, you've got a 2.2 Derringer when the enemy is bringing an 8-inch deck gun. It was sort of a bit one-sided. But yeah, they are armed. But whether they had enough. But Doug said that yesterday. It's a balancing act with the Liberty ships. You stick loads of guns on. You've got to have people to man the guns. It adds to the weight. It adds to this. So there's a balance. It's about getting the cargoes there. So more comments. So a couple of people again with a connection. Amluk saying, I had a distant cousin-in-law who was in the Merchant Marine, survived several Murmansk runs. So that's your Arctic convoy there, which is fantastic. Over the border from Canada, Sheldrake saying, no, hang on, that wasn't it. It was his comment I'm looking for. The last 2 Second World War veterans in the small town where he lived for 25 years were merchant marine vets. They were both a little bit that took till 1992 for them to be recognized as veterans. So, that it's people are saying that the merchant mariners from various countries they knew did kind of feel that they were overlooked and disregarded and not appreciated, which is, as you said, things have been rectified, but maybe a bit too late because most of the men and women have already passed away. But Gina in the UK is saying, I personally think our merchant seamen were underrated both here in the UK and the US. We would have been stuffed without them, which is hard to disagree with you there, Gina. That's I concur completely. A couple more questions. Sheldrake's question was, were there any US merchant marine ships engaged by U-boats in the Atlantic before 7th of December 1941? I think you kind of partially addressed that earlier on. I think you said yes, but
there were, yeah. I mean, because although there is a story about a U-boat coming into like a U.S. port and almost getting off, getting something to eat and so on, and we're not quite at war yet. It was a really odd story. I remember reading recently, and then, but then going back out and then passing up, it's like sinking other ships, but not sinking U.S. ships. But then there were U-boats that did attack all shipping. I mean, just like World War I, you did have some. Oh, thank you. I'll have to go.
The power of Google.
So, this is perfect. I'm learning on as we're going here. So, but yes, they were. They mostly some cargo, some with passengers were attacked during that time. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Gary August asks, can Andrew comment on Captain Hugh Malzak, the first black master mariner? Another story that should be mentioned.
Oh man, I feel ill prepared on this one. I'm sorry. Comment. See, I mean, these are all things.
There were 250,000 of them. You can't know all the stories.
Well,
in my world of being learning stuff every day and having to nod.
I know. I don't know how you do what you do, but no. Gary seems to know his stuff too, so I might need to talk to Gary after this. If we can find out a way to make that happen.
Yeah, I'll make that happen. No problem at all. Yeah. Well, everybody didn't know.
No, I'm gonna have to look that up. I did something where we had some of the first female naval officers, and again some of the female ones that I featured here. They were some of the first of their kind, but I did not come across him, so that's on the list. Thank you very much.
Brilliant stuff. Well, you've inspired Dennis. Dennis is saying, I think I'm inspired to go up to San Francisco and tour the Jeremiah O'Brien again. It's one of the great attractions overlooked by people returning to Fisherman's Walk and Pier 39. So there you are, Dennis. Get your ass into gear, pop up the road, and go and see a Liberty ship. Jim Walsh mentioning that the British merchant sailors were not awarded medals until decades later. We mentioned the Bevan boys, the miners, they didn't get their opportunity to march past the cenotaph on remembrance on Sunday until whatever year it was, comparatively recently. But I think I'll leave the final question to Veronica, one of our resident nurses, and it kind of piggybacks off what Doug was saying yesterday. Are there any developments that revolutionized merchant marine after World War II, like in nursing education? So was there sort of one thing that that came out of World War II in terms of merchant mariner principles that is something that you relied on when you were there? Any particular? I mean, obviously, just improvement of things organically, but anything you can think of?
Well, I mean, some things that stand out in my mind. Obviously, the training. It was a big thing that has continued to this day. Very, very rigid training. But some of the things that I guess off the top of my head, with the British inventing radar. I mean, where would we be on any ship without radar? That's the crux of everything. As far, I mean, I think part of it, I'm thinking of being on the bridge as a navigational officer and thinking about all of this stuff little by little that's trickling out, like the radar, and ultimately we're bleeding into Loran-C, GPS, depth finders, and so on. So I would say, and maybe also, you talk about nursing education on there, but what about first aid, firefighting, all of those things that I think we benefit from today that would have all come out, and different types of agents that you're using to fight fires, again, bleeds back into safety and also training that I think that we've all benefited from.
Yeah, I mean, Old 92 said that damage control. I mean, we did a show about the U.S. Navy's really rapid development of fire control, fire safety, having people specialized for specific roles when specific incidents take place. Whereas maybe at the beginning of the war, the US Navy had sort of generic, you're a sailor, but you have these specific roles and all these trades that become established. So I'm assuming the Merchant Marine kind of benefited from that, in that giving people, I mean, let's say everything was thrown at them in World War II in terms of, from the air, from the land, from the sea, climate. You mentioned the Murmansk, the Arctic convoy. So I'm assuming that all along there were these developments. There are these, here's better cold weather gear. Here's better gloves to use when you're doing this. Here's better ways of, I don't know, keep your map steady when the wind is blowing through, that kind of thing. I suppose it's just wars, despite their tragedy, do bring rapid developments of tech to counter the problems, I guess. So there we are.
And they have to, right? And, to go back to a point that we said during the LST presentation, when you're on a ship, and it didn't hit home for me as much until I was on one, that is everything to you. I mean, talk about damage control. A lot of times you're making your tools, you're making anything that you need. It is its own self-sustaining environment. And without, if anything were to happen, you're screwed. I mean, there's no going, well, we're going to get off of that, and walk and go into port or whatever. No, you're in a lifeboat. And so I think that was the one thing, even when I was out at sea and we had the general alarm go off and we had a small fire in the engine room. I mean, it freaked me out because you kept thinking, God, if this thing gets any worse, we're without a home. So to that point, that all of the technology and the lessons learned, it is sadly somebody had to learn those lessons, but it's benefited us greatly today.
Yeah, well, talking about us all learning and benefiting greatly, we'll leave the last line with Sal, I think. So his view on the tech: the sheer volume and velocity to move cargo around the world prior to World War II, about 250 million tons of cargo moved by sea. After it's about 500 millions of tons and connected the globe. So it's that the old adage of making the world smaller. We get that with the old fiber optic cables under the Atlantic. But I guess the improvements of shipping did kind of weirdly reduce the size of the world, and shipping and the ability to get things. And we just, as you said earlier, we just take it for granted. We order something, it comes to us via DHL or UPS or whatever from the other side of the world within 3 days, and we just go, yeah, great, but it's come on a ship or on aircraft. But anyway, fantastic stuff. So I will look forward to inviting you back again, Andrew. Perhaps expand on one of the things you mentioned, or we can talk about some of the people you mentioned, or whatever you want to talk about, or we can just riff about Malta next time when you've been there next year. But anyway, folks, enjoy the fact I won't be broadcasting for a few days. You can catch up on the old shows. As always, don't forget to click like and subscribe, buy my guest's books. The link to Andy's LST book is in the description below, as is the link to his previous show on LST. That was there. But I will see you all on the other side of the weekend. So cheers, everybody. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, viewers. Enjoy your weekend.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you to all that watched.
Thanks. Bye.